the IATF 16949 podcast, where we talk about all things automotive. Find us on our channel at youtube.com/IATF 16949 auditing, or visit our website at www.iatfglobaloversight.org. This is the IATF 16949 podcast.
Welcome to this IATF 16949 auditing podcast, and this is episode 8. And I'm delighted again to be joined by Niall Healy from SMMT and Devon Gage from IAOB. So I think, Devon, for you it's good morning, for Niall it's good afternoon. We're talking today about internal auditing, and in specific, the competencies of internal auditors. So now, maybe if we can just start off right from very basics then. In IATF 16949 related to internal audits, what are the different types of audit that IATF mandate?
Yeah, so Paul, Devin, good to speak to you again, and anyone else who's listening. So yeah, from an internal audit point of view, the IATF mandate 3 types of audits as being kind of vital for an organisation to be across its risks, as it were. And we have the internal system audit, which is auditing the quality management system using internal auditors. The second one is manufacturing process auditors. Those are internal auditors that specifically focus on the audit of the manufacturing process. Obviously a really important part of what an IATF 16949 certified organisation does. And then the third type of internal audit is the product audit. And again, these are audits that are done on the product, and that could be in its finished or semi-finished condition. So 3 audit types.
Right, thanks, Niall. And then Devon, so if we want to try and find in IATF then the competency requirements for internal auditors, where would we find that?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So initially you're going to want to open up IATF 16949 and go to requirement 7.2.3, which is internal auditor competency. However, you're also going to want to visit our IATF Global Oversight website and pull down the latest SI, Sanctioned Interpretation. Sanctioned Interpretation number 4, which was issued in October 2017, revised some of the words in that requirement.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Devon, then. So 7.2.3 in IATF, and the requirements in there have been changed by Sanction Interpretation 4. So let's break it down then. Now, let's start the discussion then about system auditor competency. So what does IATF require as the minimum competencies for a system auditor?
Yeah, so there are kind of 5 minimum competencies that are defined in that clause that Devin referred to, 723. One is an understanding of the automotive process approach, including risk-based thinking. The second one is an understanding of any applicable customer-specific requirements. The third one is an understanding of the applicable IATF 16949 requirements, and that would include any ISO 9001 requirements, again related to the scope of the audit. An understanding of the applicable core tool requirements, again related to the scope of the audit. And then kind of a key one is the ability to understand how to plan, conduct, report, and close out audit findings. So they're the core competency, the minimum competencies that we would expect for quality management system internal auditors.
Okay, and just to follow up on that then, Devon, is there any requirement then that people doing internal system audits attend any particular duration training? Does it have to be a 2-day course, a 3-day course, a 5-day course, a lead audit course? Is there any specific requirements?
Well, within IATF 16949, it calls out that the organization shall establish what they consider training requirements for those auditors. Now, you also have to make sure you check your customer specific requirements to see if there's any additional requirements.
Right. Okay. And now anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, that's a great point. So obviously the classic sort of reference to customer specifics, because some customers, a number of ITF OEMs and other customers might, and in some cases will, mandate some additional competency requirements and things like specific training. But what I would say, Paul, is there is no basic requirement for someone doing internal audits to have been through a training course. The key thing is competency. So they have to be competent to be able to undertake, in this case, quality management system audits. I think we would all agree that having a level of training is really beneficial to help auditors understand what they're doing and start to get familiar with the internal audits, but it is not a requirement that is stipulated in the IATF. But as Devin said, check those CSRs, those customer specific requirements.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, because I think there is some misunderstanding sometimes that people have to attend, for example, an external training course of a certain duration. But I think you've both made it very clear that is not an IATF requirement. IATF focuses on competency. But as both of you have said, we also need to take into account customer specific requirements. So if we then move on then to manufacturing process audit. So Devin, to be a competent manufacturing process auditor, what are some of the things that the auditor would need to understand?
Yeah, so they have to demonstrate technical understanding of the relevant manufacturing process that they're auditing. So we're looking at risk analysis, maybe PFMEAs, looking at control plans and fully understanding those part and how they feed into the manufacturing process.
Great. And if we take then, they must have this technical understanding of the manufacturing process. How might an organization now go about demonstrating that they've got that understanding, that competency?
Yeah, that's a good point. So in an organization, you would almost expect a level of let's say awareness, given that the internal person that's about to become an internal manufacturing process auditor actually works within that organization. So you would expect that just by working within an organization, they have a basic awareness of the manufacturing processes. But the expectation here is that they are competent in auditing, let's say, a press work or an injection molding, whatever the process is. They have an understanding of that process. And as always, Paul, it's kind of tricky to pin this down to anything specific, but you would expect them to be able to explain where their competency comes from, how they feel that they are deemed competent to audit a particular manufacturing process. I think it's such an important basic requirement that yes, they understand the process they're about to audit. And there are a number of ways that sort of competency could be determined, including they've worked in that environment at some point, in that particular process at some point, or they've been involved in it from an engineering point of view.
Yeah, so I guess it's back to competency, that it could be education. Maybe they did a degree in mechanical engineering, which gave them some of the basic understanding.
Yeah.
It could be work experience, either in their current company or maybe even in previous companies, or it could be training by somebody who's got a very in-depth technical understanding of the process.
Yeah.
Or maybe a combination of all three.
It's interesting, Paul, just sort of on that point, we almost, with the internal quality management system audit, there is a tendency to almost bring in a completely fresh pair of eyes, again with some basic understanding. But I think when it comes to internal manufacturing process audits, we wouldn't just bring in someone completely new with no experience of that manufacturing process to come and audit it. They would need to bring with them a level of competency before they were able to sort of undertake an internal manufacturing process audit.
Yeah, and I guess the key thing is then the organization does need to keep some record that they've done an assessment of that competency, and they're happy that that person can demonstrate enough technical understanding, not just of the manufacturing process, but as Devon said, of the risk analysis, the PFMEA, the control plan, and the associated documents. And Devon, I guess it means then that there could be, in theory, then a different group of people, maybe particularly in bigger companies, different groups of people that are doing the system audits versus the people that are doing the manufacturing process audits. Would you agree with that?
Paul, that's 100% right. Oftentimes you will see that there are different groups within large organizations that specifically look at systems, and then other individuals that specifically do the process audits.
Yeah, good. So let's move then to product audit then. And Niall, I know historically there's been a lot of confusion, I think, around the meaning of product audit. But let's just focus on the competency part. So to do a product audit, what competency would a person need?
So at a minimum, Paul, the standard would define minimum competency around understanding of product requirements. So again, if someone was tasked with doing a product audit, the expectation is they have a good understanding of the product that they are about to audit, but also, again, it's kind of obvious, almost relevant use of the relevant measuring and test equipment that they're using in order to do that product audit. So again, a bit like the manufacturing process audits, you wouldn't put someone who's got no experience of using measuring equipment and ask them to do a product audit. So these are people that have a good understanding of using measuring equipment and auditing products. Yeah.
Yeah. And Devon, again, would it be possible then that the organization has got auditors that are competent for both manufacturing process and product audits, and the organization elect to do those audits together? Is that possible?
It depends on how the organization has defined this within their QMS, and looking at customer specific requirements as well, and making sure that they have the proper competencies to meet those audit requirements. If they're able to do that and they set their QMS up to be able to do that, that's allowed.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because some CSRs, for example, for German customers, might mandate VDA 6.3 for manufacturing process audits and VDA 6.5 as a guidance for product audits. So yeah, it depends, I guess, on whether the customer specific requirements mandate that they do the audits in a particular way. But Paul, I have seen some companies, who have done that.
I think there is a logic in potentially combining a manufacturing process audit, or at least tagging onto it. Maybe combining is the wrong word, but tagging onto it a product audit as well. There is some logic in that, but of course it depends very much on each situation. But for me, I think that would be a possibility, that you're also building some product audit onto the back of your manufacturing process audit.
Yeah, good. So Niall, I'll pick up with you again then. So if we have qualified auditors then, so they could be system auditors, manufacturing process auditors, or product auditors, or a combination of two or three of those. What about the minimum number of audits they have to do then to keep their internal auditor qualification?
Yes, so I sort of vaguely remember the conversations around this, and many of our listeners can probably think of examples where they're nominated to be an internal auditor, say, but actually they do very few internal audits. And again, as we all know, if you don't do something very often, it becomes harder to do it effectively. So within the IATF standard, there was a desire to build in that sort of minimum level of activity. Really, it's down to the organisation, each organisation to define that. But there is a minimum expectation that internal auditors are doing at least one audit per year.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess that's one audit that if they're doing system, manufacturing, process, and product, they'd have to do one of each because they're different types, aren't they?
Yes.
Not just one overall.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. And Devon, what might change then once an auditor is qualified? That means that maybe they do need some training, some development. What types of things could change?
Yeah, so obviously they have to maintain the knowledge of the relevant requirements, right? So if requirements within IATF 16949 change, so through an SI, they would have to take training and fully understand that SI that was released. Same goes if the requirements within ISO 9001 change, they'd have to understand that. Obviously, if they're introducing new technology or new product technology, they would have to take training to be able to understand that.
Yeah, good. Okay. And I think that is a gap in a lot of organizations, particularly on the sanction interpretations, that they don't have an effective communication process. Niall, do you agree?
And Paul, just again to sort of underline the maintenance and improvement in internal audit's competency. So this expectation that they're not just, auditors are not just deemed competent and off they go. There is an expectation that they are improving and sort of learning and enhancing their approach. And the standard really leaves it down to the organisation, as we mentioned, to define what that minimum number of audits per year is. But as I say, we would expect auditors, and it's within the organisation's interest to ensure their internal auditors are as active as possible to get the most out of the internal audit process.
Yeah. And maybe in terms of, there is again a misconception that sometimes auditors say that internal auditors have to go through some form of periodic requalification. Devon, is there any requirement for that in IATF?
No, there is the requirement that the auditors must, to Niall's point, continue and make sure that they understand anything that is new and comes down. But there's no stated they must be requalified within X months or X years.
Yeah, which is different to the third-party auditor qualification, where there is the minimum requirements they have to meet, etc. Niall, in terms of internal witness audit, so them having some process where somebody is observing the internal auditors undertaking audits, again, is that a requirement or good practice?
That's a great question. It's not a requirement. So once an organisation has deemed an internal auditor to be competent, then technically the organisation can set them off doing internal audits. But I do think it's really helpful to have some sort of peer review process where they're being supported almost as they get going as internal auditors, someone that they can talk to help almost coach and mentor them through the internal audit process, such that they improve. That's the whole point, that they end up doing more effective audits. That's in their interest, but also the interests of the organisation and their customers. No mandatory requirement for it, but it's probably a beneficial thing to do.
Yeah. And final question, Devon. I've sometimes heard the IATF auditor guide mentioned. Is there anything relevant in there that could be used to help develop internal auditors?
Well, yeah. So the IATF Auditor Guide is a good resource because it outlined the auditor competencies that we require for the third-party auditor, right? So if you're looking to really understand those competencies, you can put those into your organization's QMS or auditor development as well, as a reference. Because, like I said, it defines our 5 auditor competencies that we require for the IATF auditors.
Yeah. Anything you want to add on that?
Yeah,
Niall?
no, Paul, that's a great point to sort of just to bring that up. The auditor guide, as always, a slightly underrated IATF publication. Not underrated, but underused. So not everyone knows about the auditor guide in the way they know about the standard and the rules. And any opportunity to kind of elevate its use, I will take, partly because I think it's really useful in a way for all auditors, but specifically for internal auditors. We talked earlier about demonstrating competency, and what the auditor guide does is it actually lists out the applicable knowledge and skills that we would expect an auditor to exhibit. And it's a perfect use of that would be for an organization to almost assess the competency of its auditors using that format that we see within the IATF auditor guide. So, and it applies throughout the entire kind of audit process. But when you get into things like core tools, there's a really useful list of, well, this is what we think an auditor should have the knowledge of, and this is what we think an auditor should be able to do in terms of application. So yeah, really useful and helpful resource for internal auditors too.
Yeah. Good. So no, thanks again, Niall, and thanks, Devon, for an interesting discussion about internal auditor competency. My view is, I think that if an organization invests in having really good, competent internal auditors, it will help them drive improvements in their system and, in theory, have less external audit non-conformities. So I hope those of you listening from the supply chain will take some of the messages that we've been delivering in this podcast and try and take it back to your own organizations. So thanks, and look forward to the next podcast.
Speak soon. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Devon.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
The IATF 16949 podcast, where we talk about all things automotive. Find us on our channel at youtube.com/IATF 16949 auditing, or visit our website at www.iatfglobaloversight.org. This is the IATF 16949 podcast.